Hola. Bueno, gracias a todos, a todas por venir. Para mí es un honor cuando me invitó la madraza y Caja Negra a presentar a Mckenzie, porque llevo siguiendo su trabajo de deslizamientos entre la escritura hace mucho tiempo y creo que es una oportunidad maravillosa tenerla en la ciudad de Granada. Viene haciendo un tour por diversas ciudades de España, ha estado en Madrid, en Valladolid y ahora la tenemos aquí. Y bueno, empezar también agradeciendo a la madraza, al Centro Cultural, la Universidad de Granada, al Centro Cultural de las Letras y sobre todo a Caja Negra y a Mckenzie. Thanks for coming with us. Y voy a empezar a hacer una presentación, después ella nos presentará su conferencia de hoy. Os voy a leer un extracto del último libro que acaba de recién publicar, que es este que tenéis aquí, ¿vale? Y en él dice: aprendí algo sobre escribir, que una cosa puede sustituir a otra. Un cuadrado de tela se convierte en una capa, una caja se convierte en una pelota de fútbol, una hermana puede maternar, un padre puede maternar, un chico puede ser un lobo si se lo permites, un chico puede hasta convertirse en mujer, puede que prefiera convertirse en mujer a ser un rey. Este poder, el que tienen las cosas para sustituir a otras, para mí es una especie de poder de feminidad. Un poder que no radica en la fuerza. Su poder es ser capaz de usar todos los caminos disponibles para evitar la captura tanto como sea posible, evitar estar bajo su control. Yo no tenía muchos deseos de ser rey, tan solo quería escribir mis cuentos de hadas. Mckenzie lleva escribiendo estos cuentos de hadas, como os digo, de los que he aprendido creo que algo, y sobre todo a través de rabear la escritura, deslizarse entre los géneros, escapando, cogiéndose siempre de los caminos torcidos e invirtiendo en una realidad que muchas veces duele. Como las suturas, las operaciones, las muertes, los abandonos y las mentiras. Y otras veces se descubre en las mejores alianzas, amantes, madres, amigas y otras con las que seguir conjugando pieles y signos. Mckenzie es hoy profesora imparte clases en la Escuela de Nueva York y eso le ha permitido, como viene a contarnos, trabajos profesionales que le permiten poder abordar diferentes proyectos de escritura. Ha publicado libros como El Manifiesto Hacker, editado por Harvard, Gamer Theory, también editado por Harvard, y Capital is Dead por su amada editorial Verso. En castellano tenemos la oportunidad de poder encontrar esos textos, Manifiesto Hacker por Alpha Decay, La playa bajo la calle por Hermida, editores, en el que abordaba los temas del situacionismo, y finalmente Capitalismo muerto por Simbiontes. También ha colaborado en plataformas editoriales que para los que nos dedicamos a esto del mundo del arte pues son casi como una biblia, ¿no? Como es la revista Flux, editando el número Trans Film Aesthetics y en el 2022 Black Rave junto a Madison Moore. Pero es quizá desde hace 2 años cuando el trabajo de Mckenzie ha estado más presente en el contexto de lengua castellana y de habla hispana gracias a la editorial Caja Negra, con la que ha editado 3 de sus últimos libros, que son los que tenéis aquí. Vaquera invertida en el 2022, Raving 2023 y Amor y dinero, sexo y muerte, que ha sido publicado hace una semana, o sea, lo tenéis calentito. El año pasado, la madraza, en colaboración con el Festival de Música Electrónica Ritmo, que pronto tendréis en Atarfe, nos invitaron a realizar una actividad dentro de la universidad, dentro fundamentalmente del proyecto que se llama Bailar la Casa, que es un proyecto que tiene lugar en Casa de Porras, y aquí pues planteamos un club de lectura que pasó a llamarse Lectura de Club, y en él lo que estuvimos haciendo era trabajar sobre el libro Raving de Mckenzie, y fuimos deslizándonos por lo que ella habla del tiempo K, aprendiendo del feminismo ketamínico, del ilujurismo y de la rave como una práctica semi-eufórica. Es un texto de situaciones en el que, como escribe ella misma, no hay continuidad. Al igual que la rave, la escritura es una práctica en la que puedo entrar y liberarme de la disforia, de la tristeza, del deseo inútil, La obra es La mancha de semen, en este caso un recuerdo a su admirada Cathy Acker. De todo ello viene hoy a hablarnos Mckenzie, y en esta charla que ha titulado Autoteoría crítica, Amor y dinero, sexo y muerte. Y sin más, thank you, Mckenzie.
Gracias. Buenas tardes. The rest, I'm sorry, is in English, but the translation is on the slides, so you can follow whichever is congenial. And thank you, Jesus and Marina and everyone, for my first time in Granada, which has blown me away. This is called critical auto theory. I've always had a yen for books that lie askew, that play with the genre as form, that tweak the reader's expectations, books that, when you open them, open also towards uncategorizable desires. In the case of Love and Money, Sex and Death, I wanted to put some tension through a set of categories like social sciences, LGBTQ studies, transgender studies. And then, needless to say, I also like books that cross the line between the scholarly and books that, in the trade, we call trade. This can be hard to do and on a number of levels. We're in what Dan Sinyikin, in his very useful study, Big Fiction, calls the conglomerate era of publishing. It can be harder and more expensive for booksellers to get books from smaller publishers or from academic presses, which offer less of a discount on the retail price and don't offer booksellers shipping and all that sort of thing. Writing trade books, particularly for the conglomerates, comes with some constraints. They want to sell books like the books that have previously sold well. This comes up early in the process. If you propose a trade book, invariably via an agent, you'll be asked to name comps, comparable titles that did well. This can be a curious exercise if your previous experiences with academic publishing. In proposing an academic book, you want to say your book is not like others. In proposing a trade book, you want to say that it is. I imagine it's very similar in Spanish and English, yeah, how this works. I tried pitching Love and Money, Sex and Death as a trade book to conglomerate publishers. I only got one nibble. An assistant editor expressed interest in working with me if I could turn it into a more conventional memoir. He is a white cis-gay man with Ivy League credentials, and I appreciate his interest, but that's where we are with diversity, or where we were with diversity in conglomerate publishing. So I came back to Verso Books, my publisher in English. My editor there, Leo Hollis, with whom I've worked before, knew what to do with me. He didn't try to make the book more conventional, but did gently nudge me towards solutions to some problems. And I like the book we made together. Late in my writing life, I started writing what I'm not ashamed to call autofiction or auto theory. They're not exactly respectable ways of writing, although they have their charms. I think of autofiction as writing in which a character with the same name or attributes as the author appears, but where that character is not attempting to write the truth of the self in the manner of memoir or autobiography. Selfhood is itself a fiction, and the writing is an account of how the fiction of a self is produced. I think of auto theory as not too different to autofiction. Both are interested in the perceptual. Autofiction is more interested in the affective dimensions of what's perceived. Auto theory, more conceptual. It's more interesting to think of autofiction/auto theory as tactics rather than genres, and as a continuity of tactics. I'm going to call that the autotextual. These practices made this self, these institutions, these historical circumstances. It chanced these slings and arrows. Sorry, that's a Shakespeare reference. I should point that bit out. The translator said, what is slings and arrows? Sorry, there's no Cervantes reference. The name of the author in the text is an empty sign that forms a node in the perceptual field around which unfold the situation of its making. Love and Money, Sex and Death won't tell you much about the true secret inner life of Mckenzie Wark. Sorry. It might tell you instead about an era of media and culture, about the forms of family, class, sexuality, which went into the production of a legally recognised entity known as Mckenzie Wark. I'm not the creator God of this life or this text. I'm just a made thing, like any other made thing. Just one that's curious about its making. But I started writing like this as a matter of circumstance. Emigration from Sydney to New York left me feeling lonely and disconnected. I wandered around the city in a dissociated fugue state, partly culture shock, partly gender dysphoria. Kristen, who was my wife at the time, had given me a personal handheld GPS, global positioning device, as a gift. This was years before there was GPS tracking in everyone's phone. And I'd record my GPS coordinates in a notebook and then write about that place and time. That became a book called Dispositions in 2002. That's mostly a book about the tension between the abstraction of GPS and the particulars of scene, setting, mood, ambience at the coordinates recorded. I felt this world being rendered ever more abstract by vectors of information that could command economic and strategic forces to be deployed around the globe. The book ends in the days after 9/11, when the Twin Towers got attacked, right? With me and Kristen drifting around the scene of the disaster. And this book's last words are, "This dust," she says, "this dust is people." So most of my writing at the time wasn't like Dispositions, however. It was in a more abstract style, a critical theory style, engaged with the historical struggles of my time. A Hacker Manifesto came out of my engagement with the digital media avant-garde of the 1990s. We were trying to make the revolution in the media of our time through politics, art, theory. We lost. I was trying to find a language for an emerging class, those who make information as difference, a different kind of labour to making commodified sameness. Gamer theory is that book's bleak double. It also voices a persona, a gamer rather than hacker. It tries to find a language for what I'd sensed in Dispositions was a sort of planet-wide enclosure of all space and time in a game space of zero-sum calculation and competition. It articulates what I learned hanging around a different creative subculture, that of independent game designers. I actually still think thinking of the world in terms of game space is sort of more revealing than talking about neoliberalism, but we can pick that up later if you want. Those books aren't too removed from the autotextual. They're about the making of collective rather than individual subjectivities. They attempt to defamiliarize subjective experience by freshening language. They look for language for what's coming. The autopoetic worldview of the hacker suffered a series of defeats in the 20 years since it came out, and the enclosed world of the gamer became the prevailing mood. Now, I felt that Marxism, and that was, I'm from it, I'm in it. But I felt that Marxism was living in the past, and the wrong one. It became a sort of scholastic simulacrum of itself, and not surprising given that it was now mostly produced in academia. I tried to give it fresh language, fresh forms, and it worked. I mean, both books did pretty well. A Hacker Manifesto was translated into 12 languages. I just found out it got pirated in Russian. Seems apropos. I found myself among interesting readers, often with commitments and projects and perspectives that were also trying to engage the struggles of the present. I was excommunicated by Marxism, however, by certain defenders of its orthodoxies. After gamer theory, I wrote some books that tried to put in circulation some of the materials that the sort of genteel world of academic Marxism holds at arm's length. The Beach Beneath the Street and The Spectacle of Disintegration are sort of before and after books about the failed revolutions of 1968. Molecular Red is also a book about failed modernity on a grand scale, that of the Soviet Union and the United States from the point of view of dissenting Marxist currents. Actually, Molecular Red, 2015, like the thesis of that book was the failure of the Soviet Union is the preview of the failure of the United States, and I think I called it, yeah? I didn't anticipate living in it as it unraveled. I was raised intellectually, politically, even emotionally in the labour movement. The mood back in the late 70s was already that we were a defeated people. If one takes praxis seriously, then the defeats in practice of our movement, and those defeats have been horrible in scale, means that one cannot keep repeating the same old theoretical truisms. One starts over, drawing other resources from the past. Not to be that bitch, but I wrote enough books for 2 academic careers. As a provincial outsider with a constitutional inability to kiss the ring, my academic career was never going to be a sterling ascent crowned in institutional prestige. In any case, I'd rather be a writer of the city, of my city, New York. I was never really tempted to leave it just for professional reasons, and I'll be there as the waters rise to meet me. May also be one of those things you write that you regret, right? Where we are. Besides being careless with career management, I tanked whatever credibility I had in media studies by coming out as transsexual, right? The dysphoria got to me, I just couldn't take it anymore. I became one of those late transitioners. We who have our cake and eat it too, even if it's gone a little stale. From the relative comfort and security of a middle-class life, I decided to write whatever the fuck I wanted. Hence the sequence of autotextual books picking up from dispositions. The next one was accidental. Kathy Acker's, do you remember Kathy Acker, the writer? She's in Spanish much. Her executor wanted to publish our email correspondence, which came out as I'm Very Into You. One in which 2 people who don't know that they are in some sense trans intuit that about each other but don't know what to do with it. That's my reading of that correspondence. After that, Reverse Cowgirl, delightfully, the title translated as Vaquera Invertida. I had so many conversations about that. That's the whole of the story. My translator was looking at Spanish porn sites, and it's like, you know, it's Reverse Cowgirl in Spanish. I don't know what we're doing. And I'm like, let's make something up. All right, so Reverse Cowgirl, raving, and now Love and Money, Sex and Death. The most interesting autotextual writing does one of 2 things, and even better, both. Shows how selves are made and makes room for a kind of self that otherwise barely gets to exist. Transsexuals, for instance. Sometimes it's an achievement just to declare on the page that we exist. So many others claim authority over us, narrate us in the third person as if we're not in the room. We're the object of pathologizing expert discourse, or we're quirky minor characters in third-person fiction. The condition of possibility of third-person narration is often the mutual ignorance of writer and reader, and the conceit that the other written about is not also able to read and write. I made some cuts in this so it jumps a little bit. There are 2 kinds of Marxists, those who think everything is capital and those who think everything is labor. I'm the second kind. What the commodity form hides from perception is that it is always the product of socially organized labor. Take Love and Money, Sex and Death. It appears as a commodity in the bookshop. If you buy it, the bookstore gets about 40-45%. The rest is split between the distributor, Penguin Random House. You get about 20%. Publisher Verso, who get about 25%, leaving 10% from me. Spanish publishing is probably similar, but I'd be super curious to know if the numbers are at all different. You could look at this and critique the way in which the commodity form has saturated the whole process. Writing and bookmaking are subordinated to the extraction of a profit from our collaborative labour. Commodity form turns writing's promise of the possibility of textual difference into the reproduction of sameness, the sameness of categorization which disciplines difference into repetition. Commercial publishers are in the business of minimizing risk, but that in turn risks boredom. Every now and then they take a chance on something a little different. If that works, then you see a bunch of things come out a year or two later that used it for comps. After Maggie Nelson had a minor hit with Argonauts, you can be sure a lot of agents and editors were looking for another Maggie Nelson, which is not the fault of Maggie Nelson. Substitute here examples from Spanish literature. The autotextual is a writing tactic that's actually been around for a long time under various names. But if you only get your information about book culture from publicity handouts, it seems that autofiction is a new trend. Now, a Marxist reading from the point of view of capital might then go, aha, autofiction is the logic of the market over determining the writing process. Autofiction equals neoliberalism. Autofiction equals reality TV, equals selfies, equals narcissism, equals neoliberal capital. Ta-da! If you're rather undialectical, Marxism only perceives from the point of view of capital, then like capital, it finds sameness everywhere. I find this a bit lazy and ironically neoliberal in its own way. It takes the appearance of things on the market as allegories of capital at work and capital only. Everything is capital, which is, of course, neoliberalism's key theory, that we're all just human capital. Hence, there is about what I now call neoliberal Marxism, which everything is capital, but it's bad, right? Neoliberalism is a theory where everything is capital and it's good. Neoliberal Marxism is a theory that everything is capital, but it's bad. It's the same theory. Can we stop doing this, please? I'm over it, as you might guess. How does this look from the point of view of that Marxism in which everything is labour? Writing is work. Of a sort, the writer, like the worker, only has tactics in and against the production of commodities. Sometimes the same tactics, sometimes different ones. Most work under capitalism is the production of sameness. The organisation of labour by capital reduces it to repetition in the name of measurement, efficiency, value abstraction. Writing is work, but work that does something else. It produces difference. A work of writing can only become a commodity if it has a measurable amount of difference from existing works. That's how intellectual property works, right? The contradiction in writing for the trade press is that the book has to be different enough be a work of saleable intellectual property, and yet the same enough to be like other works that have been successful. There's a whole industry out there which schools writers on how to do that, how-to books, workshops, MFAs, and agents whose job is to detail writers for the market like you would a used car. So what's a writer to do? One tactic is refusal, stick to the periphery of the industry, to the small presses, to circuits of writing and reading that do their best to decommodify that relationship. And I'm all for publishing collectives with political agendas, but they tend not to endure long and struggle to get distribution. There's also, I don't know about it in Spain, but certainly in Anglophone world, non-profit publishers. Much of that world is supported by grant money from foundations who have their own agendas. They like to support diversity, but they like to keep the diverse in their place. Actually, I could name some names about that in Spain, but I've been the beneficiary of some of that, so I'll be a good girl. Another tactic is to write in and against the dominant form in the marketplace by writing through the contradictory experiences of trying to live any kind of creative life in the game space of present condition. when the autotextual is interesting to me, that's what it's doing. It's writing in which the process of its own making is present in both the form and content of the book itself. It's not the only writerly tactic that can do that, but it's a fun one. You can conceive of writing as labour, but the problem is that I never really know which part is the work. Which part of this is labour? How does the form of life shape the form of writing? The autotextual might, among other things, be a tactic for writing in which people who do creative work, and what I used to call the hacker class, communicate to each other about the shared problems of the connection between the practice of life and the practice of art. The Situations had this great slogan they used to paint out in the working class suburbs: remember, you're sleeping for the boss. And it's sort of like when you're a sort of intellectual worker, you're sleeping for the boss in this whole other way. Yeah, I'm writing emails in my sleep. You know? So when am I working, when am I not? That's even a question. Any writer can deploy autotextual tactics, and I'm interested in it when it comes from those excluded from the set of those whose right to be a human at all, let alone a creative human, is contested and embattled. So my reading of the autotextual starts with Jean Genet, A Lady of the Flowers. It's prison writing, homosexual writing, and maybe even trans writing. Anyone read this one? It's kind of trans, this one. Which calls the writer into existence through the capacity to fabulate the situation in which the writer writes. Shorn of its stylistic curlicues, that tactic shows up later in French gay writing, in Ève Cuber and Guillaume d'Ostan. Anyone read d'Ostan? Love d'Ostan. The latter's direct, minimal prose, which also comes in part from the later autotextual books of Marguerite Duras, like the text Writing, my absolute favourite book, a book which is about exactly that, or the now famous work of Annie Ernaux. The Years contains the entire post-war experience of France, as experienced by a sort of provincial, sort of almost working-class woman. The autotextual is a way of weaving together the personal and the political, is a whole subset of tactics. And these are three American instances. But is Gloria Ansel-Dua known in France? I'd love to know how that book got translated, because like a quarter of it's in Spanish in the original anyway. Anyway, like fascinating book. It's called Borderlands, La Frontera, Audre Lorde, Zami, or Leslie Feinberg's Stone Butch Blues. They're books that deal with the negotiations involved in producing solidarity out of difference. How can one negotiate being both queer and a comrade? And all three came out of the small press world, relatively free from the category constraints of conglomerate publishing. All right, you're going to know this one. Paul Preciado's Testo Junkie makes a lot of sense if you've read some of the above, and it pivots from auto-administering testosterone to a theory of post-war capitalism that centers the production of sex via pharmaceutical and pornographic techniques. It's also, and this is often ignored, I think, in a kind of explicitly Marxist book, and one that takes issue with the Italian and French theorists of cognitive capitalism, by centering the situation of gender-fuck radicals whose experience of commodified life is hardly reducible to cognitive labour. Although sex work is also cognitive labour, right? It's just, you kind of don't get to see it as just that. Testo Junkie is the secret source of my own book, Raving. Both try to connect particular practices to the forms of real abstraction that dominate the contemporary world. If you start from practices, you can appreciate the differences in how people live and labour. There's no solidarity without the mutual appreciation of difference. You can discern how the totality within which we live and labour, same space, has particular historical contours, which appear, I think, to have mutated. Or as I put it in another book, Is it capitalism or is there something worse? Like that, I think, is the question. And you can appreciate how that totality appears differently when perceived from different situations through different working methods. And I like the autotextual best when it extends beyond the particulars, when it reaches for a particular universal, for the totality as perceived from a point of view. This is not the universal of third-person narration, that unknowable totality of totalities. Writers are not gods. The autotextual is the creator becomes secular. Finally, for the practice of writing autotext, there's a corresponding practice of reading, which relates the particular universal as perceived via different working methods to each other in the name of a comradely production of knowledge. And that's what I've been trying to do in my books, General Intellects and Sensoria. Sensoria is coming out in Spanish a year from now, also from Caja. Both devoted to the work of others, who I read as having produced interesting particular universals from different situations via different methods. The danger of writing in the third person is the sort of flyover view that erases or suppresses the particulars that it can't totalize. And the danger of writing in the first person is being confined by voluntary or involuntary means to the particular only, foreclosing a sense of totality of all. But what about writing in the second person? So the epistolary has always intrigued me. It too has been a tactic for certain modern and contemporary writers, from Victor Shklovsky's Zoo to Dennis Cooper's The Sluts. It's a surprisingly common tactic in recent trans writings, such as Kay Gabriel's Queen in Bucks County or Cecilia Gentili's Faltus, which I highly recommend. The second person turns the writerly self away from the self toward the other, and in addressing the other within the text, models the interpretation of the book's other, the reader external to it. That has its uses for trans writing when confronting readers, including even trans readers, used to perceiving transness through the cis gaze, which categorizes us as objects to be discounted, distrusted, spoken of or for, or to be fetishized. And so Love and Money, Sex and Death, my most recent book, is a series of letters to mothers, lovers, and others about practices of self-making, self-becoming within given historical, political, cultural constraints. So not critical theory, critical auto-theory. I've grown disenchanted with those strains of academic Marxism that had turned it into a doxa. And for Roland Barthes, who himself is a great exponent of critical auto-theory, doxa is a sort of overturning of history into nature, such that we shrug and say, it's always been like that. It's just what it is. And so I think, neoliberal Marxist doxa is the belief that not only is everything capital, but that the essence of capital is eternal and never changes. Only its appearances change. The world of appearances, the world of the senses, incidentally also the world of labour and play and practices of all kinds appears only in the negative, as derivations of an essence that only the sage critical theorist can observe from a stately distance. Now, I'm not claiming that critical auto-theory would be some noble ethical alternative. And on the contrary, I'm touring bookstores and universities and festivals actually around the world to promote my book as an embrace of the contradictions of being in and against the commodity form. So my motives are mixed. I think it's good practice, but I also like the attention and the royalty checks. And a line that I think I want to add is, being bad at business is not a critique of capitalism, right? So honey, get that check, get paid for what you do, like with that. I'm over that aristocratic, being above it all of certain writers and academics. Oh, I'm above all that. It's like, no, girl, I'm from petite bourgeois culture, get paid. So if there's to be any ongoingness to Marxism, I think it needs to get more vulgar, more common, more fleshy and ill-bred. It needs shelter outside the academy, which shaped Marxism after its own image, more than we academic Marxists care to admit. The struggle for liberation is a continual one of defeat and renewal. When theory fails the test of practice, then practice should inform its renewal, as it ever was. What came to be thought of as the mature Marxism came after the defeats of 1848. Now, these are different times, and we're on the defensive against creeping fascism everywhere. It's not so creeping in America at the moment. It's what's the opposite of creeping? It's like stalking fascism is what we're up against. Against which, what is even our image now of the good life? Perhaps it's to be found in fragments of the everyday, when we live without dead time, while fucking, while dancing, while wandering without appointment, when we glimpse another city for another life. Let's write that. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mackenzie. When when Marina talked me about moderate the question later, I just want to invite another person. Thinking the idea of feminists to make some question about the talk. And here you can see on the screen. First of all, Rafa.
This one?
Yeah. Summer, are you first?
Mackenzie, my dear, how happy to feel.
I'm going to rotate that. I learned how to do it today.
I love that it's sideways too.
It's better.
It's queer that way. Well, if we must.
There you go.
Mackenzie, my dear, how happy to feel you in Granada and to see you there. Well, I am happy that Jesus invited me to ask you a question. So, you know that with Rafa we are working on reconstructing a trans memory through art for a long time. And I want to ask you how much space does your new book dedicate to trans memory and its redefinition?
Sorry?
Thank you very much. I love you. Mackenzie, my dear, how happy to feel you in Granada and to see you there. Well, I am happy space does your new book dedicate to trans memory and its redefinition? Thank you very much. I love you. Mackenzie, my dear, how happy to feel you in Granada and
Cool, I got it already, thank you.
Mackenzie, my dear,
She just changed her name and I can't remember the new one, but it's half of El Palomar, who you might know, who I highly recommend. Trans memory, and I think that's got two parts to it. One is the memory of our ancestors, and El Palomar, for example, has a video work and also an album about Daniel Paul Schreiber, who best known through Freud's complete misunderstanding of her, redoubled by Lacan later, but who is one of our ancestors. Like, it's clear Schreiber was experiencing transfemininity as euphoria and lost her goddamn mind. So they made a work about that. So this book less about recalling and bringing to the present our ancestors. I've done that in other work. This book's more about transmemory in the second sense, which is what does it mean to remember one's life in the world as a trans person, and how does transition change memory? So this is a book very much about how my own memories of my own past changed, particularly when I went on hormones. And the centre of that is my mother died when I was 6, and that was a traumatic experience that I thought I had laid to rest. And I transitioned, I went on hormones in my 50s, and suddenly I was like confronted with the entire thing all over again in a different emotional space. So, writing isn't therapy. I spent a lot of time with my therapist figuring that shit out, but then it's like, how is that art? How is that aesthetically interesting to then think about, transition can change memory, and what does it mean to remember a past that was in another gender, And is there an alternative to thinking, I lived a false life and now I live my true one? I don't think that's as helpful as thinking we're always kind of a fiction to ourselves, but you can really inhabit a better fiction than the one that you've just taken for granted. One can have some agency in the ficticity of one's own life.
Si queréis traduzco un poco o todo bien. Sí, bueno, yo no soy traductora, pero voy a intentarlo. I'm going to translate. Miguel, Jesús and I'm going to help you. Miguel, Jesús y yo vamos a ayudar un poquito para que quien quiera se sienta cómodo para preguntar y seguir un poco. Resumidamente ha dicho que este libro es menos de traer al presente los ancestros, sino que significa recordar como pensar qué significa recordar como una persona trans, es decir, cómo cambian los recuerdos cuando se es una persona trans. En concreto nos dice que su madre murió cuando tenía 6 años, algo que fue evidentemente traumático, pero que a los 15, con el comienzo de la transición, o al menos de esto que es disforia, entendido poco a poco como euforia, ¿no? Se enfrentó a ello de una manera diferente, pero con esto no quiere plantear como una alternativa de mi vida antes era falsa y ahora es auténtica, ¿no? Sino entender que la transición no es solamente como un cambio en este sentido, ¿no? De lo falso a lo verdadero, sino que transforma también la idea del propio recuerdo. Luego tú, que si no yo me... Bueno, pues voy yo.
I love this format. This is so cool.
I think I have to rotate the video.
Let's see that.
Hi everyone. Hi Mckenzie. Hi Jesus. Nice.
That one definitely should be sideways, I think, yeah.
Bueno, more or less. I'm translator, IT.
Hi everyone. Hi Mckenzie. Hi Jesus. I'm sending you this message from a possible future, and I bring you hope and a question. First time I listened to you, Mckenzie, you talk about estrogen that came from Mars pea, the female horse pea, and you said it gives to the person who take it superpower, like extra vision, hypersensibility, a different perception of reality. Well, if I'm not wrong, you understand your novels as self-fiction, as since this world is going to shit, and we need a trans-vectile planet, or with trans technologies where to go. Have you ever thought writing science fiction?
Resumen, que antes no traduje la pregunta, ¿has pensado alguna vez en escribir ciencia ficción?
There's actually like a science fiction utopia that I write in my head when I'm going to sleep. Maybe it should stay there because it's utopia. or almost utopia. I have no imagination whatsoever, really. I couldn't, I love science fiction, but I couldn't really write it. But the other thing that's hinted at there is, transgender people are science fiction. We use techniques to, intentionally remake ourselves. We're not the only people who do that. I think everybody actually does that. But we're, a little more intentional and self-aware about it. So science fiction already. But you gotta know your limitations. Oscar Wilde says, every artist has their limitations. Those limitations are style. So I know what I can do, and this is it. I'm not a novelist.
I will try. Dice que hay una utopía cuando se va a dormir y sueña con quedarse allí. Pero, bueno, porque es una utopía, pero no porque, porque le gustaría vivir en ello, ¿no? Pero que no se ve escribiendo ciencia ficción, no es una novelista. Sin embargo, sí que piensa que las personas trans utilizan técnicas constantemente de la ciencia ficción porque de alguna manera hay que crearse, ¿no? El término que ha utilizado es make-up, que es como imaginarse, ¿no? Hacerse, crearse. Dice, eso lo hace todo el mundo, pero quizá las personas trans con mucha más intensidad. Y ha citado a Oscar Wilde, que no me ha dado tiempo, no sé si la habéis pillado mejor o algo así, pero que la cuestión es, ¿son las limitaciones un estilo? Y que desde ahí parte su escritura. Si queréis traducir, quiero decir que yo estoy aquí traduciendo, pero...
I was going to ask you, where are your favorite science fiction writers?
Oh.
He's an specialist.
Oh, really? Yeah, I don't have particularly original choices. J.G. Ballard, Philip K. Dick, Ursula Le Guin, Octavia Butler all blew my mind as a young person, particularly Ballard, particularly Ballard's Crash, and whether that's science fiction, who knows. Then William Gibson. I'm the generation who was just completely fucked up by that, by William Gibson. Kim Stanley Robinson, who I wrote about. Yeah, it's not exactly science fiction, but N.K. Jemisin interests me too. Yeah, recently.
¿Disteis los nombres? Philip K. Dick, Kim Stanley Robinson,
Ballard, Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler y William Gibson.
Octavia Butler.
Samuel Delany.
Es lo mismo.
Samuel Delany's Trouble on Triton. Yeah. Trouble on Triton is about the worst trans woman ever. She's an absolute piece of shit. But he gets away with it. I'm like, oh God, that character is just awful. I'm like, yeah, sometimes we are.
What is the title of the book?
Trouble on Triton. Or someone's just called Triton.
How it's related.
Triton is one of the moons of, I want to say Jupiter.
Viaje a Trap o algo así.
Trouble.
Problema en...
Problem.
Ah. Well, trouble. Pongo el...
No.
What's coming now?
I know, I love this. I'm going to steal this whole idea.
Esto.
There's no image.
If...
Hey everyone, I would love to be there with you, but it was impossible to me to travel to Granada. And I want to thank Jesus for asking me to bring a question to Mckenzie. Hi, Mckenzie. And my question is about this political subject that you propose, the feminist, that these feminism concepts appear in Rabin and other articles on metaphysics, and for sure is in your last book too. And I want to ask, who are the feminists? What we can do as feminists to make this collective improvisation together
Yeah, I got this word from a meme, and the meme was, like the sickle, but it wasn't crossed with the hammer, it was crossed with the magic wand. Good luck translating that.
No, because he was talking to me.
Oh.
¿Podéis traducir vosotros? Sí.
The sickle, like from the hammer and sickle, but it's crossed with the magic wand.
Like wand, ¿no? La varita mágica. O sea, es la hoz y el martillo, pero en vez
The
de...
ladies in the audience might know what I'm talking about. Famously made by Hitachi originally. So it's a giant vibrator, right? So it's the sickle and a vibrator, and it just said feminism under it. So it's not feminism and it's not communism. You put the two words together. And, because I'm bad at Romance languages, I want to make it feminisma, right?
Feminisma, ¿no?
Feminisma.
Ma.
Ma. Right.
Es mu, ¿no? En el libro.
It's, sometimes it starts with the language and the concept comes a bit later. And I don't quite have the concept of it yet because I think it's going to take some thinking. But what if we recentered the project of...
Hello, Mackenzie.
Nada. What if we recentered the project of imagining the good life around not just women's but feminized labor and play? So what's that imaginary of the good life and the good world? What would that be like? The traditional communism is very much man with hammer. Feminism is a project that I would want to wholeheartedly endorse if it didn't have strands that are connected to whiteness or transphobic. So there's internal struggle and debate within feminism. And maybe feminism is a way to address that by centering labour, difference, practice. And also, the other thing that's in it is fem. Feminism is sometimes hostile to femininity. Well, is that really necessary? And it's actually particularly disabling for trans women. So, yeah, I think there's like a little cluster of things tied up in the bow of concept to come. I'm not going to promise to write a book about feminism. Someone should. Maybe, if I get a minute, maybe that's a project I'd like to.
La pregunta que le hacía es Marta, ¿no? Marta Chávez, ¿no? De Caja Negra.
She asked me this when I saw her in person. I'm like, honey, I don't know. I was like, girl, you have to ask me in public.
Le ha preguntado como qué es eso cuál es su postura con respecto al feminismo, ¿no? O qué se puede hacer como feministas, ¿no? Ha sido como la pregunta final. Y Mckenzie ha recordado esta conjunción que plantea entre feminismo y comunismo, que sería feminismo, luego con este mu al final. Y lo que plantea un poco es que esta cuestión empieza primero como un juego de lenguaje, pero que luego se va convirtiendo en un concepto y que lo que está de fondo es una práctica, que lo que plantea es recentrar el proyecto de la buena vida, este concepto filosófico, ¿no? De qué significa la vida buena, desde no pensarlo como la vida buena de las mujeres, ¿no? Desde las mujeres, sino qué significaría feminizar esta cuestión. Plantea que el comunismo normalmente tradicionalmente está asociado como hombres con martillos, ¿no? Un poco volviendo a esta metáfora de la hoz y el martillo, y el feminismo sería repensar la vida feminizada y sobre todo las cuestiones que están vinculadas, por ejemplo, al trabajo, ¿no? Por eso se ha centrado en esto del labor y el work, ¿no? en su ponencia. Dice que muchas veces esto de fem, ¿no? En el feminismo, se ha conectado con la feminidad, algo que resulta extremadamente problemático, sobre todo como persona trans. Dice que no sabe si escribirá un libro, que no lo promete, pero que alguien lo tiene que hacer. Es una invitación abierta.
Other bit is the root buried in the word commune is munus, and munus is probably what the Roman citizen owed to the treasury for sacred purposes. So what is common and what's sacred is a question that's buried in the etymology of that part of the word. Etymologies always interest me, but creatively.
Quiere remarcar que esto de comunismo, evidentemente lo de comuna, pues como que es muy claro, ¿no? De la comunidad, pero esto del munis, ¿no? Remite a ciudades romanas, ¿no? Roman cities users, ¿no? Que específicamente se referían como, o sea, que tenían como centro una cuestión del tesoro, de lo secreto, de lo sagrado, ¿no? Y que como que le interesa especialmente recuperar esa cuestión, ¿no? Que está detrás de esta segunda parte, comunismo, y que siempre le ha interesado mucho la etimología porque le parece que hay algo verdaderamente interesante. Ahora os toca a vosotros. Nos ayudamos si queréis. ¿Sí? ¿Hay un micrófono para escucharnos bien? No, creo que es una tontería.
Bueno, en primer lugar, darle las gracias a la ponente. Me ha parecido que tiene... Bueno, me ha encantado. Punto. Y a mí lo que me interesa de ella es profundizar un poco más, si es posible, en ese concepto de feminismo, que no es solo rosa, y evidentemente que lo defina un poco más el concepto de feminismo que tiene ella, ¿vale? Mi inglés es tan macarrónico que no me atrevo ni siquiera a saludar. Así que lo tenéis que traducir, por favor.
Sí, bueno. She wants to thank you for the talk. She said she really liked it. She is interested in this concept of feminism, and she would like you to go deeper on that if you can.
Haven't written that book yet.
Yes.
I mean, and some of this has been done by others already. So it's the contribution of women to all the branches of the labour movement interests me. International Women's Day started in the labour movement before it sort of got co-opted as something else. So yeah, I'm interested in, and then there's third world Marxist feminist movements interest me, and the books like Leslie Feinberg's Stonebridge Blues, which is already a trans feminism coming out of labour movement struggles. So I think it's trying to sort of synthesize existing histories, but trying to then find a concept of what if we centered the idea of the good life on what women do. It then also connects to a lot of current work around care and the sort of politics of care. In the United States, that's all we've got at the moment for a lot of us. So it's a question of sort of synthesizing all those things and maybe sort of moving away from the rhetorical space of feminism to, because this is a tactic, right? What if we change the language and see how changing the language gives you a different perspective on what's now, century of struggles, conceptual developments that are internally contradictory, so that you can find which strands of that you want, you don't. Sort of decenter, sort of police feminism, white feminism, bourgeois feminism. It's like, not necessarily, some of those are not entirely bad things, but to sort of decenter those perspectives that in Anglophone world became very dominant within feminism. sort of change the language, change the thinking and practice.
Voy al lío. Se me ha olvidado decirle lo del el feminismo rosa, ahora se lo digo, sino para que matices. Amplio. Creo que con lo que ha respondido, más o menos. Dice que le interesa mucho en general los movimientos de mujeres que están vinculados con el trabajo, que aparecen en la cuestión del tercer mundo, movimientos masivos del feminismo, etcétera. Entonces, es verdad que esto le ha interesado, pero dice que no le interesa tanto sintetizar movimientos existentes, ¿no? Como de alguna manera, bueno, esto lo digo yo, pero como historizarlo, ¿no? No sé si más o menos por ahí, ¿no? Sino de nuevo, ¿no? Como pensar esta cuestión de la vida buena que decíamos, ¿no? O lo que sería lo bueno, pero poniendo en duda o cuestionando, por ejemplo, las políticas del cuidado, ¿no? Porque decía que, por ejemplo, en Estados Unidos han llegado a la cuestión de cuidar a Dios o la familia, no, la idea más conservadora, ¿no? Del asunto esto del cuidado, por ejemplo. Entonces, cuando ella plantea lo de feminismo, es que no sé cómo traducirlo, pero feminismo, ¿no? O sea, como es una forma de cambiar el lenguaje para ver las cosas de otro modo y precisamente descentrar, es el término que ella usa, ¿no? Este feminismo blanco, burgués, que puede llegar a ser conservador, ¿no? Que para ella ha sido dominante. Entonces, esta nueva palabra lo que invita es a pensar otras formas de feminismo que no que también pongan en eso de la propia vida. Espera, cogemos el micrófono para... Es para que se... I agree with you.
Es un movimiento, el feminismo entendido, bueno, como lo entiendo yo, claro, el feminismo entendido, y que creo intuir que ella, con todos los temas que tenemos, pues es más difícil, pero que básicamente sí he querido decir que ella tiene un concepto que trasciende incluso el concepto de movimiento de las mujeres por la igualdad. Que lo que queremos ahora es un movimiento nuevo donde las mujeres y los hombres quepan todos los tipos de mujeres, todos los tipos de hombres, y eso dé lugar a una forma de relacionarnos los unos con los otros, que es donde está la auténtica espiritualidad. Y no buscar la espiritualidad dentro de los mormones y dentro de la iglesia y dentro de las catedrales, porque ahí no está la espiritualidad. La espiritualidad la tenemos que construir día a día los seres humanos, entendiéndonos, comprendiéndonos y respetándonos más. Entonces, ese es para mí el concepto de feminismo actual, el feminismo del 21, no el feminismo del 20, ni del 8, ni del 19, ni de la Revolución Francesa que se fue. ¿Entendéis? Un poco la idea de ella, verdad que ha metido cuidado, porque los cuidados también se tienen que utilizar, porque el cuidado ha sido femenino siempre, entonces ahora el cuidado tiene que ser compartido, porque los hombres también tienen derecho a participar del cuidado de los demás, porque te cuidas a ti mismo, sabes cuidarte tú, sabes cuidar a los demás. Que uno de los problemas que ha tenido, de hecho, la violencia de género que hay detrás, los problemas que tiene la violencia de género detrás...
A ver cómo traduzco todo esto.
Give me a minute to catch up.
Bueno, un concepto de feminismo total.
Sí,
es decir, que invita al hombre y a las mujeres a plantearse ellos mismos y la relación con los demás. Punto, se ha terminado. Y que todo es cultural y todo es creado. Entonces podemos crear un mundo mejor si nos da la gana. Y si nos ponemos de acuerdo. Si no nos ponemos de acuerdo y no nos da la gana los seres humanos, pues entonces seguiremos siendo...
Can you give my translator a minute?
No, ya lo saben. Ahora, no con lo que
es la síntesis.
No sé si eres titular ya, pero bueno.
No, todavía.
Por eso te digo, pero bueno, como vas para maestra, tienes que saber capaz de sintetizar las intervenciones de los alumnos. Gracias, guapos. A toda la mesa y en general.
I will try to synthesize. Please help me if I miss something. She says that she understands that you think feminism as a rurality. That means that that goes beyond any specific movement. And C, understand from what you explained, I hope I translate properly, that feminism means that every kind of woman, man, or whatever we understand under this definition is involved, is invited to be in this feminism. And she asks herself if here there is a new spirituality. And she understands this kind of total feminism, that implies a new, total concept of man and woman, whatever that means. That is the 21st century feminism and not older feminism.
It's tricky. I'm a third generation atheist, and before that my people were Protestants. So one of the chapters of Love and Money, Sex and Death is actually a prayer. Tricky genre if you're an atheist, but it's a prayer to the mother of all gods, Cybele, worshipped by the in Greek and Roman times for 600 years, but whose priestesses were trans women. We had our own god, not just any god, mother of all gods. And that struck me as interesting to play with. Like there's a way that a kind of theological language is a bit unavoidable. And particularly I'm in community with a lot of trans people in America who were raised in the black church, or if they're Spanish speaking in the Catholic Church. So, and they're expelled, yeah? But the heart still needs a language for something. So, it's one of the layers, but it's very tricky, and I don't want to do it in a sort of new agey way. And I'm never becoming a monotheist. But I think that's one of the dimensions, is to find languages, rituals, practices around, I don't know how you're going to translate the numinous, but, the unknowable. Also, third generation atheist, I went to Brazil and went to a religious ceremony that's Umbanda, which is like Candomblé, and I had a religious experience and talked to a god, so I have to rethink my whole worldview, having now spoken to Pombagira, Lady of the Night, consort of Isu. So I don't believe in gods, but I believe in rituals and why rituals are important. And there's a way that my book Raving is about a ritual that very carefully one could think of as having a religious dimension, but with zero liturgy, zero belief structure. It's just the ritual. That strikes me as maybe the modern version of that. So give me a few years to pull some of these strands together. Yeah, it's like I'm not done yet, because each book seems to suggest a couple others that if I don't do them, maybe someone else will.
Sobre
deep.
Oh, sorry.
That's it.
Sobre todo se ha centrado en la cuestión que has nombrado sobre la espiritualidad, y ha dicho que ella viene de 3 generaciones de ateos, pero que toda su familia anteriormente era protestante, que sí que quiere remarcar que es algo que le interesa porque, por ejemplo, en el nuevo libro, no sé si lo tienes ubicado, pero hay una oración, eso es. Y en concreto se ha centrado en eso porque deriva, bueno, por no meterme con todos los detalles, si quieres comentarlo tú, Jesús, pero sobre todo porque las profetisas a las que refiere eran mujeres trans. Pues como que le parecía especialmente interesante, ¿no? No sé si quieres comentar tú, Jesús, o acabo un poco... Eso es.
Pues dice, a ver si encuentro... Dice, tú amabas te habla de Cibeles como una deidad que venía de Frigia. Dice, tú amabas a Atis y tu amor no titubeaba. Atis te amaba también, pero no tan bien. No podía amarse a sí misma. Desde el comienzo, Atis era lo que ahora llamamos trans, y tú lo sabías, y la amabas igual. Pero ella simplemente no podía creer en tu amor, Cibeles. Conozco el sentimiento. A muchas nos sucede. Cuando transicioné, creí que nunca más iba a ser amada. Te habla también de una serie de personas que acompañaban a Cibeles y que son el colectivo trans que realmente te acompaña a lo largo de toda tu vida, ¿no? Entonces, esa idea de la espiritualidad, que es complicada, se puede llevar a este lugar que es el que ella plantea, ¿no?
Claro,
I'm aware there's a statue of Cibeles in Madrid, and that the Real Madrid football fans think she belongs to them, and it's like, those boys have no idea. I think that's a lovely extra layer for the Spanish reader.
Dice que esto de Cibeles, que ella es muy consciente de que la estatua de Cibeles en España, específicamente en Madrid, pues que tiene un significado, y mucho pues para los hombres que siguen el Real Madrid, que no tienen ni idea de lo que hay detrás de esa estatua. Bueno, solamente por acabar, por matizar esto, entonces, ella dice que justamente le interesa esto, ¿no? Como las personas trans generan una comunidad específica, y además que muchas derivan de estar en contextos eclesiásticos, y lo que ella rescata no es tanto la cuestión de la creencia, sino los rituales, ¿no? Dice que no quiere que suene a New Age o como una cosa así, como un espiritualismo que sea un poco superficial, sino sí que ella cree que el lenguaje modifica los rituales, y que también esta manera de nombrar de nuevo implica también de alguna forma pensar lo incognoscible o lo que no se ha podido conocer todavía o algo así. Entonces, por eso dice, no creo en dioses, pero sí en los rituales, y por eso Raving es específicamente un libro sobre rituales, pero sin una creencia que lo sustente detrás, ¿no? Dice, de todas maneras, que le des unos años para pensar sobre esto. Que le des unos años para pensar sobre esto.
Participated in a ritual in Brazil.
Ah, sí, es verdad.
What was the name of this belief or this ritual?
It's called Umbanda.
Umbanda.
And it's derived from Candomblé, and it's related to Voodoo and Santeria, and these are all based on West African, mostly Yoruba, possession religions. And to be clear, I was a guest there. It doesn't belong to me, but it was a truly moving experience. And the theology is the only one that makes any sense to me. And the calling down of the gods to be present, that you talk to them, was incredibly powerful. Yeah, and the god I got is Pompagira, who is the consort of Isu, god of the crossroads, and she is the patron god of travesty, among other things. And so it was just like, it blew my mind. But to be clear, I'm a guest in that space. Like it's not a thing that can really belong to me. But I really respected it all.
Bueno, sí que entró en contacto con una deidad. What was the name?
The deity is Pompagira.
Pompagira.
Pompagira, yeah. Who then has 20 aspects, but we won't get into that.
It's the brother?
Sister, consort. Like
the consort of?
Yeah, Isu.
Isu es el dios de los cruces.
Yeah.
Isu
is the guy. Yeah.
Y también del travesti.
Sí. En Brasil, ¿no? Que tuvo como una experiencia así, pero que era una invitada, que no era...
Sí, que no se identifica con ello, que en realidad no es algo que pueda pertenecer.
¿Más preguntas? More questions? Allí hay dos. Ah, no, Marilu. Una de Cristian.
Hi, Mckenzie.
Hi.
I'll try to do this in English, and later then I'll translate it to Spanish. Well, it's hard to ignore happening currently in the whole world, especially in your country, in the United States. And during this conference, especially you were talking about fascism. And so I'm curious, especially because you are not right now in the United States, but it seems like fascism in the world right now, it's not hidden anymore. But my concern is, I think the rest, not all countries, but the rest of the world has always looked up to the United States as like the center of rights, and especially like queer movements. So my concern is what will happen when the center of that is now controlled by this fascist politics and regime. Y bueno, ahora en español. Básicamente me preocupa que ahora en Estados Unidos, que históricamente ha sido el centro de movimiento de derechos queer, y que muchos países en el mundo lo han visto como un referente de justamente derechos queer. Ahora se manifiesta un movimiento contrario a esto, que niega identidades y trans identities especially. So, entonces me preocupa what's for the future, porque Estados Unidos sigue siendo un referente en el mundo. Entonces, it's concerning to me.
It's bad. Always contradictory, given that a lot of people didn't particularly want the American version of queer life as a model anyway. So having been in touch with travesty in Brazil, or travesty in Brazil and travesty in Argentina, they don't want to be trans women. They're another thing with another history. And so, there's always, whatever gender system you've got, there's always the other within it, yeah? And it's always a little different, and it helps to, be sensitive to those differences and not universalize it. And I think it helps to advance the space for queer or trans people to do it in a way that's internal to the culture and not coming from outside as sort of like an American model, for complicated reasons of personal political history, the United States was never the model for me. But I love New York. I didn't emigrate to the United States, I immigrated to New York. That's my home. And its specific culture and struggles are the ones that are sort of meaningful for me. But I do think that the end of a cycle of, if that's what it is, of civil rights struggles in the United States, started by black people, like that's the model for the rest of us, was the civil rights movement, was how do you claim subjecthood and personhood? And the model was this like astonishing movement of black people for civil rights, yeah? The rest of us copied that and modeled on that. And that, more than a half century of struggle is being reversed, possibly quite quickly at the moment. And we will, of course, fight it. But it's got consequences for the rest of the world. It's got consequences particularly for Europe. The United States has never been a good ally to anybody necessarily, but is now straight up holding Ukraine to ransom. And I think the rethinking of the Atlantic Alliance, is going on in Madrid and Paris and Berlin right now, of like, what do we do that our supposed, frenemy, the United States, now cannot be trusted at all. So I think the European space becomes very important, and then the national spaces within that. I'm not a fan of nationalism or states, but that is a space where you have the possibility of at least sustaining minimum rights to personhood, to a share of the social good, and so on. So it's sort of vitally important to resist fascism wherever it is, and the kind of unravelling that it threatens. Sorry, it's like there's more to that, but that's just like a little piece of it. Yeah,
I will try. Bueno, muy rápidamente dice Estados Unidos es malo, o sea, no. Y nada, que siempre en estas cuestiones siempre hay contradicciones y que ya no tiene claro que el modelo para las personas trans y queer sea Estados Unidos, sino que, vamos, que algunos no lo querrían, incluso dudarían sobre la cuestión de que haya un modelo, ¿no? Y específicamente ha citado sus encuentros en Brasil y Argentina con travestis, en los que en ningún caso quieren ser como Estados Unidos, pero pensar como cada vez, por así decir, ¿no? Cuál sería la cuestión queer. De alguna manera también plantea que en cualquier sistema siempre aparece un otro, pero que esta otredad en lo trans siempre es un problema, ¿no? Que se presenta como lo que decíamos, ¿no? Como una contradicción, y que por lo tanto encuentra problemática esta cuestión de hablar de un modelo, ¿no? Ya sea en negativo o en positivo. Dice que le encanta Nueva York, pero no Estados Unidos, ¿no? Que Nueva York es como la ciudad en la que ella se siente bien, pero no en Estados Unidos, y que si hay algo que coger o que abrazar de Estados Unidos sería en cualquier caso las luchas por los derechos civiles de la gente negra, que eso sí que entiende que es un movimiento que ha cambiado, que ha transformado la forma de entender los derechos de este colectivo. Y que desde luego que la situación actual de Estados Unidos tiene consecuencias específicas, que el debate es ¿y ahora qué hacemos, no? Con esto? Que no hay que confiar en Estados Unidos y que Europa para ella tiene un rol específico muy importante, que no lo quiere decir en términos nacionalistas, ¿no? Como un nacionalismo fuerte, pero sí en términos de resistencia de potencia. Any question? Any comment?
Now you know why it always says I'm Australian in my biography, although I'm not nationalistic about being an Australian, but it's like not an American.
Dice que pone que es australiana porque no quiere que se diga que es americana.
Hi, I'm Mckenzie. Thank you for coming to Granada. I thought it was a type that made me think a lot. In the last slide, you were talking about writing about the good life, and I'm asking how can we do that? I mean, we are in the context about, I don't know, about the agenda of the media and the system that aim to live on a transitory way. So what we can do that?
Yeah, I learned so much from...
Sorry. Fernando traduce.
Vale, sí, lo traduzco. Nada, simplemente le pregunto que la última diapositiva ha puesto que tenemos que escribir sobre la buena vida, sobre eso, lo más positivo, y cómo lo podemos hacer, el contexto en el que estamos.
I learn so much from particularly like black trans women who are an adjacent community to mine. There's points where we connect, and they've never expected much from the world ever. And it's sort of like the rest of us are getting a taste of what their world has always been like, you know. And yet, what I learn is the importance of joy and ritual and care and community is too loaded a word maybe, but, you know, belonging. So, yeah, who already knows how to sustain life under very pressing circumstances, and why not treat that not as the margin, but as just the center, you know, and to me that's sort of the center of, you know, trans social life in New York City. This, you know, you go to the party, and if what we call the dolls show up, you know, then it's blessed, you know, because they know what a party is, and they will bestow that joy on you if you behave yourself and respect it. Respect's very important, you know. So it's, yeah, like some of that's in raving, you know, like that's my book about, you know, I as I said in Madrid, I don't do hope. Get Franco Berardi if you want hope, you know, or someone like that. I do joy. You know, I don't know where hope is. I know where a little bit of joy is, you know, and that will get you through. But it means paying attention to who knows the value of that and how to sustain it. Difficult circumstances, you know. And it's going to be a little hard to find, be a little bit of work, but it's there.
Lo que dice es que esta cuestión ella la ha aprendido específicamente de las mujeres trans negras porque ellas nunca han esperado demasiado del mundo. Y dice que ella, sobre todo lo que ha aprendido es la importancia de la alegría, de los cuidados, de la noción de ritual y de la comunidad, pero en términos de la pertenencia, ¿no? En concreto, la pregunta que se hace con respecto a esto es quién sostiene la vida bajo circunstancias opresivas, y que en este sentido, pues ella, por ejemplo, ha visto que esta vida social trans en Nueva York se da con este colectivo que se llama The Dolls, ¿no? Que es como las muñecas, y que allí en las fiestas son, por ejemplo, respetadas, ¿no? Que es como que saben cómo moverse, ¿no? O sea, como que se da una especie de paréntesis, ¿no? A esta vida dañada. Dice que esto está específicamente en raving y defiende esta noción de alegría. El término que utiliza es joy, ¿no? Como esto, ¿no? Que es una mezcla entre alegría y diversión, ¿no? Como, y no esperanza, no es hope, ¿no? Que sería el otro término, ¿no? Que esta cosa como de la esperanza es como de, ay, va a venir una vida mejor, no sé qué, sino que es... ella dice que le interesa pensar desde estas mujeres porque se fija en quien explora esta alegría desde la vida dañada, ¿no? Eso es la vida cotidiana.
One more, maybe? We've been here a little while. How many thoughts? Share.
¿Alguna más? She says, congratulations for being brave and for coherencia, ¿cómo se dice? Consistency.
Oh, I don't know if I'm all that consistent.
Dice que no sé si es muy coherente.
Never. I thank you for the compliment. But
pero que gracias por el piropo.
Never
por el cumplido.
Tried to be this, and yeah. But I appreciate the sentiment. Thank you.
Que nunca he intentado ser muy coherente.
Consistently inconsistent.
Coherentemente incoherente se definiría, ¿no?
That sounds even better in Spanish.
Coherente. It sounds good. I like it.
Yeah. If there's nothing else, then maybe I can say thank you all for coming. It's been a real pleasure to be in Granada for the first time ever, and I hope I get to come back.
Muchas gracias y que espera volver. You're welcome.